You have to help them drive change, and change is hard. We're humans. We like the way that we've been doing things, and people don't naturally like to change. So if you really want to be that partner to really add value, you're the person that's helping transform that organization. And you do it through your solution, you do it through your customer success engagement. But really, I think if you're able to help customers drive and adapt to the constantly evolving and fast moving new world, that's where you're going to really be the partner. And that's where you're really driving those business outcomes.
Flourish CX, the only show helping CX leaders do one thing: empower their customers. Each episode democratizes best practices while leaving you feeling both inspired and equipped to take action. Let's get to it.
In today's episode, I'll be talking to David Sakamoto, VP of Customer Success at GitLab, about some of the issues with customer experience, from measuring it to its actual existence, and what organizations should be focused on to ensure positive outcomes for their customers as well as for themselves. I'm Kieran Doyle, your host for this episode of Flourish CX, and as you listen, ask yourself, is your experience making your customer successful, or is experience the outcome of their success with your product?
I lead customer success at GitLab, and everybody always likes to know where to report. So customer success at GitLab is in the CRO organization. It includes our solution architect, with our sales engineers, and our professional services team, and our TAMs, which are effectively like a customer success manager. So it's a solution architect, professional services, and TAMs.
So what's something someone couldn't see on your LinkedIn to let us get to know a little bit more about you?
I definitely wouldn't put this on my LinkedIn, but I'm super accident prone. So I think I've broken both collarbones, both legs, my ankle. I think I've had over 100 stitches from my neck up.
Oh, wow. Being accident prone, we usually ask this question: what would you be doing if you weren't in your current role? I'm guessing not a bull rider or something like that.
Definitely not. My career would be very, very short-lived. The reality is, I'm not sure. Because the funny thing is, I went through my career, I've done this really eclectic background. Thank God customer success came along, because it brings the connection and collection of my experience between product, engineering, operations, services, program management. So luckily it came along, because I believe it fits very naturally for customer success. But one of my passions as a kid was doing digital animation. So I saw Star Wars and was super inspired. And I had probably my side dream job would be working at Pixar or somewhere like that, Industrial Light and Magic.
Very cool. I guess it's a happy accident you're in customer success. So let's dig into that. What are some of the problems, issues, misconceptions people have around customer experience?
I think customer experience is important, but a lot of times people think of customer experience as the function. And I may stir things up a little bit, if that's okay. But I somewhat view of that as just a pure function is somewhat antiquated. And then I associate that with, call it kind of customer success 1.0 versus 2.0. So if you remember the days of perpetual software, you'd kind of post sales would be like, hey, all right, we got high NPS, great, yay. And so I feel like CX is, you talked about NPS, you talked about customer effort score, which are important things to consider as part of the journey. But I think the modern customer success has overlaid and is a much better focus for organizations in being very considerate and thoughtful of customer experience within that motion is certainly important, but that alone isn't the goal. I think we've evolved to a much broader view of what customer success looks like. And so I kind of think customer experience is a little antiquated.
We've had people on here saying that, customer experience isn't any one thing. It sort of touches anything. But what you're saying is it's so amorphous, it's almost not tangible in any way, shape, or form.
So if I think of, what is the thing? So obviously I'm a little biased towards customer success, but I think ultimately the miss in it, and I even see customer success organizations that don't have this, is incorporating a better definition of delivering value or outcomes to that customer like the true business problem that you're solving, as well as the commercial result. So net retention or net ARR, increase ARR. I think it's been trumped by a better, more comprehensive view of what you should be delivering for your customers and for your organization.
So why are people being sort of misled to focus on CX when it's not driving the right outcomes?
I'm not sure. In the reality, it's a great focus as a component of a much broader mosaic of things that are important for both the customer and growth. So I think of a more balanced, concrete view, tangible results that you're going to driving. And I think of customer success in really two planes: driving those outcomes for your customer and driving growth for the business. And I definitely believe if you do the first one really well, you're driving those outcomes, you're delivering value through product adoption, and you do it with a good experience, you're going to help drive that growth. But again, it's one component of ultimately what you're going to be looking to drive with a modern customer success motion.
And I think as we have more of these conversations, there's this idea that the customer is not always right, is very much real today. And you said something before about making a customer happy doesn't necessarily make them successful. And I think that's another way where, yes, the customer experience is great, but you're not delivering a good outcome for you or your business.
I think of it a couple ways because we've all had experience where the happy customer churns. And it's shocking and it's disappointing, but it does happen. But I think that's truly the indicator of what you said is it doesn't necessarily mean you're driving an outcome. They could be happy. They could like you. Carrie and I like you, but doesn't mean I'm going to continue to buy a product. So it's really understanding and really aligning the organization around how you're going to drive those outcomes and setting up a set of metrics, predictive metrics that will help you ensure that you're delivering those.
There's no shortage of customer experience metrics. So why are these metrics like NPS, like CSAT, maybe even customer effort score, although that seems to be much more real, capturing the moment of what customers are trying to do? Why are the metrics sort of not telling this same story? Are people focused on the wrong metrics?
I think there's a couple things. Wrong metrics is one of them. So at GitLab, when we look at it, we have a prove methodology that we're working in terms of, are they adopting the product? And ultimately, we're kind of weaving in, are we ultimately building outcomes? We're trying to look to like verified outcomes of working with a customer. Do you understand the risk with that organization? It could be risk to their business or risk to stakeholders. Are you ultimately delivering those outcomes? So you kind of identify what they're trying to accomplish, and you have a process like a success plan that's tracking to truly measure and actually deliver to those with confirming with the customer, have we done this? The V for prove is voice of the customers. That's where we do, I do believe those customer experience metrics do play a part. I also believe you have to look at them over time. You could see variability based on specific experiences in that journey. So I think you've got to kind of look at that as as an indicator, not an absolute. And I think the other one, I think that probably two that are most important, the E, engagement. So product and engagement is, are they engaged? So do they have cadence calls? Are they participating in events? Are they participating in a customer advisory board? So really looking at, are they investing also in the relationship? So again, the product, risk, outcomes, voice of customer, and engagement.
And actually, I think we've had a few people on that said just not responding to either a survey or an invite or some kind of communication, that in itself is telling, sort of as a metric of if they're not happy or they're apathetic, like that's the response you're going to get. So that's also a warning sign.
Absolutely. And I think another example of that, and I've heard this, that's great, we don't have any support cases. No, that actually could be very bad. You ultimately want indicators to know that they're actually leveraging your product. And sometimes if they're due, you'd expect at some point they're going to have questions, they're going to need help. Or if they're not responding, that these are all signs of a disengagement that you should be paying attention to.
It sounds like from what you're saying, it's customer experience seems to me to be a very one direction relationship where you're just giving a good experience. Whereas what you're talking about, there's a lot more give and take. Is that the approach people should be taking when they're thinking about their relationship with their customer? That it's not just they ask and I give, it's also a little bit more like understanding and being a partner to them.
That's right. And, again, I always arc on that value to customer and value to the business. But ultimately, I think most solutions are driving some change, whether it's just a change in your process or something. With GitLab, we're driving it. We have a DevOps platform. So often we're looking at more of a dramatic, like digital transformation, or they're transitioning to modern apps. And if you just look at that relationship as you come to me, I ask questions, you're not being the partner that you could be. And ultimately, sometimes you have to give guidance and support and help them drive change within their organization. And it's not just product, right? You need to be thoughtful around, for us, oftentimes teams kind of BYOB, bring your own tools, right? And so we need to help them get the value of our platform by bringing on other teams, standardizing on certain capabilities. You get that efficiency, that reuse, you get compliance, you have improved security, but it's not always natural. So sometimes you have to be that partner, you have to help them drive change. And change is hard. We're humans. We like the way that we've been doing things, and people don't naturally like to change. So if you really want to be that partner to really add value, you're the person that's helping transform that organization. And you do it through, your solution, you do it through your customer success engagement. But really, I think if you're able to help customers drive and adapt to the constantly evolving and fast moving new world, that's where you're going to really be the partner. And that's where you're really driving those business outcomes.
So when we talked earlier, you were talking about that firms should adopt a commercial mindset. The question that a lot of customer experience people will have and customer success people is, how do you walk that fine line between just giving the customer what they're asking for and also making sure you're leading them to a place that's strategic for your business and also for them? How do you kind of make those decisions?
I'll answer it somewhat in the context of customer success, because oftentimes you're bringing together that cross-section between services and operations, was kind of like that older school post-sales. But in what I look at the modern view, you're bringing that sales, that commercial mindset in, and maybe even marketing. So it's beyond the challenge of like finding people with that right DNA. And the way that we look at it and position it to those team members, because I'm not a salesperson. I chose this job because that's not who I am. I really love customers. I love helping people. And the way that we align it is we're selling through that value, right? So our job, I view customer success as we are helping sales, but we're doing it to ensure customers are getting value from our platform. They're doing it with a good experience. And ultimately, we talk about driving those outcomes. And if we do that, we've earned that right to at least renew, or we've earned the right to have an expansion conversation. The other thing we do is part of that motion, because part of that motion does include some commercial aspects of prepping for renewals. And you want to enable your team with the ability to ask about that. While they may not be driving the transaction themselves and maybe not be negotiating, but they need to be comfortable with that. And the way that we somewhat approach that, you build that into the process, right? At this point, here are some questions you can ask and kind of template them. We give training. We use MedPick for our customer success managers. We kind of help them be comfortable with the process of discovery and positioning and overcoming objections. But you can kind of process it. Just, at this point, at the renewal review, ask them, if you were going to renew today, would you, or why or why not? That's a fair question to ask, because renewal is part of their journey. If we think of customer experience, like we want them to have a good journey through their whole motion in orchestrating among the different team members that may play a part, and we're setting that up for the renewals rep or the sales rep to come in and help drive that transaction.
Part of your customer success team going to the customer sort of from a position of strength, not of one of service and that typical customer experience, please take your pick and we'll just go our merry way. What ways do you show the customer the value that you're bringing in order to substantiate that kind of return of value for value, and also just show the value of your team to the larger organization so that they can continue to invest in this long-term customer-focused approach?
I look to the customer journey. So if you defined what the customer journey is and what are the right things you need to bring to the table to add value, and there's a process behind that, right? You literally set up, here's the stages, here's the processes, here's the playbooks, here's the metrics that go along the journey. And what you're doing is you're defining an intention. You've kind of defined what the journey is and how you're going to add the right value at the right time. But then assuming that it's customer, because you could do digital or like a customer success manager led or hybrid, if it's involves a customer success manager, then they can also bring their creativity and insight to help adapt to that very specific customer needs, or maybe their culture, their values of how do we drive or change management? How do we ensure that we're adapting that process to their goals? What's different when you're building that intention at various stages and you're orchestrating across the whole org, whether it's, your customer success managers, you're bringing product in at certain points, you're bringing sales rep in at certain points. And so you're really making sure that you're serving the customer in the way that has the intention, which I think different from before. If you think CX, like, I feel like it's a lot more around basis, right? So it's, in some ways you could say it's reactive. I know people would contest that, and I somewhat would as well, but I'm just framing like there's a difference between kind of having intention and moving forward with the customer and somewhat time pushing them. We talked about that consulting trusted advisor view versus ask me what you want and I will give that to you and I'll give you a great experience. I'll make you happy.
So how do you set up an organization to have customers be successful, but also keep this commercial mindset? I know the way you're structured is actually very interesting, that you're under the revenue side of the house, not sort of the services organization. So you already have that mindset of customer success is critical to revenue, but also a revenue generating department. So how should other organizations think about this? And how should they structure themselves so they have a sort of a win-win for themselves and for their customers?
You've tapped on an area that's got a lot of debate. You should report to the CEO. I'm really happy that we're structured at GitLab. And as you said, we're reported to the CRO. I think in many ways, it comes from the mindset that you have with the organization. And I'm lucky, right? Our CRO, Michael McBride, and my colleagues, to some extent, they think like customer success people. So I often quote our VP of Enterprise, Mike Pyle. He often says, like, land with vision. And what he means with that is, he says, land, whatever you land, like the first new logo, first land. But what's most important, it's not what's less important is how big did you close? What's more important, did you land them with the vision of how we're going to deliver their outcomes and set expectations around what that journey is going to be, and invite and kind of set that expectation that over time we're going to expand the value. We may challenge you to ensure that you're getting the most value from our platform, because it does require change. And so it's helpful, for me, within the way that it's structured, is the mindset of my peers, right? Because I could see it going in a very different way if they viewed the world in a very different way. But as the customer success leader, I'm continue to evolve to think like the commercial mindset. It also helps that the sales leaders are also already kind of thinking customer success and journey, and how do we kind of make sure that we're going to make them successful through there, and we'll get the growth as a result. So in many ways, you start with that kind of mindset of the leaders, then you kind of work through and build that into your process. Obviously, your metrics play a really important role. Our team's measured by net retention. Part of it's because we're still working to get some of the product adoption metrics be widely pervasive, but it does set the tone. I think the mindset of the leaders that build that whole approach, and then how you structure compensation and metrics certainly continue to add on to that.
So as we're sort of wrapping up, I just want to ask you a lovely controversial question. Is the success of a customer more important than their experience?
Yes, because ultimately, what they're looking for is that when I say success, let me define success, is I'm driving outcomes. I'm delivering value. And I remember there was a VC, I wish I could remember his name, but he actually said, I don't actually care about NPS. All I care is that they're using the product and getting value. I don't subscribe to that extreme view, and none of us live in that binary view. But if ultimately I would start with, am I solving your problem? And if I do that, then I'm going to evolve and make it more elegant. I'm going to make it a better experience, or maybe we're hard to work with. And so over time, if you're starting with you're solving problems, and then you can work to do it in a more elegant way and more seamless way, in a more efficient way for your customer, or whatever, however they define the experience, and you'll get better there. And I think that's oftentimes what SaaS companies do from the very beginning, the early stage. You're solving that problem, and then they figure out how to do it in a better way, or they kind of start to segment. I'm just solving it one size fits all. Then I start to go, okay, big customers, small customers. Okay, maybe I start to figure out how do different verticals. And so over time, I think your evolution as a company and your maturity of your solution, you start to get more specific in terms of understanding each of your customers' unique needs, and you segment them in the appropriate way.
From your answer, it makes me think about those customer experience metrics in reverse, that they're not leading indicators, they're lagging indicators, that I've been successful, so I'm going to be more likely to recommend, my experience is easier, all those things, not those experiences make me successful. It's actually, they're somewhat disconnected entirely.
That's right. And the other way you can think about it is you can have a great customer experience, but not solve their problem. And so your relationship will be short.
Any closing thoughts for our audience?
We're all solving very common problems in very different places for very different customers. I'll say this in terms of thank you for the opportunity to connect with you and your audience. To the people that are listening, find others that are peers in different companies and just build those connections, network. It's beyond building great relationships. And I've got so many friends out of it. I learned so much from the great leaders, and they challenge me to think about things in different ways. And it's also just a lot of fun. So leverage your network, invest in it, learn from it, give back. And I think you're going to find it very enriching.
David, thank you so much for joining us.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, we have to have you back to debate someone in CX, the great debate, CX versus CS.
I would love it. I look forward to that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Flourish CX. To learn more, head over to zoominsoftware.com/podcast and follow along wherever you get your audio.